started. We have a surprise visitor here at Clyde this afternoon. It's none other than, I believe it is, quite Major George Krogan. He's about a little further north from Fort Stevenson, and he's going to say a few words before we start the rest of the program. Thanks for being here.
Of course, I can speak a lot of it, it's okay. Of course, I'm a little far east from Fort Stevenson, but as you can imagine, this whole area was very sparsely populated at the time. Now, how this has really, oh, okay, alright, thank you. Okay. Well, this region is, of course, sparsely populated at this time, and as far as my role in the area, is that the Americans defended a British invasion of Fremont, or what was at the time called Lower Sandusky. Now this is the uniform of an American soldier during the War of 1812. The uniform did change 4 times over the course of the war. So this is the early war uniform. I do not have my rank on right now. As a major, you would have a gold bar on my shoulder. But as of right now, this is dressed as a private. And of course, supplies were very hard to get to this area, as you can imagine. Since we're on the border here in Clyde, would be on the border of the Great Black Swamp. Very hard supply roads to get here. The uniforms weren't always up to date. And so if you lost your rank, or if you had a hole in your pants, you just have to patch it yourself and go with it. Now, the uniform itself is comprised of the blue here with the gold bars. It would be sometimes white. The color of the bar would actually designate the rank of the soldier. The hat here, you have the cap plate and the plume. The cap plate also shows what part of the army you're in. If it's gold, that means you're in the artillery. A pewter or a silver colored cap plate would represent you being in the infantry. And then you have the plume on top of your head. Why do you think, for all the kids here, why do you think I have a plume of feathers on top of my head? Any guesses? Oh, speak up a little. The what? Oh, surrender? No, of course. No, this isn't a white flag. I don't want to surrender. It's actually quite the opposite, but that was a very good guess. You always think of raising a white flag to say you're surrendering. Well, the plume was simply to make me look taller. When you can imagine the fighting back then, you had rows of men, and they would line up and they would fire volleys of muskets at each other. Well, when you're across the field, you want to look bigger, taller, and more impressive than the guys across from you. The only downfall is that every army, as far as European army at this time, had a plume on the top of their hat. So you weren't fooling anyone by making yourself look any bigger. And then you have a wool uniform. Underneath this I have a wool vest and a linen shirt. I have a pair of linen pants on, and this is the summer uniform for an American soldier at the time. The only thing different is that in the winter, you might get a pair of wool pants. For the most part, those soldiers out here in the Northwest always had the linen pants, so it's extremely hot in the summer, and it's actually very cold in the winter. So you're not very prepared for your environment around you. And to keep in mind that this is the Northwest Territory. You don't have anything past this. So Ohio is a state, but Michigan's a territory. You have Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, they're territories at this time period. And this is where the fighting is taking place. And it makes it all the way to Fremont, Ohio, at Fort Stevenson, where the British try one last time to try to defeat the Americans out here in the Northwest. They were unable to do so. What happens is that General Proctor, the head of the British, comes to Fremont, Ohio, comes down or up the Sandusky River, and he has around, the accounts vary, but you can say around 2,000 Indians. When the British lay siege to the fort, they bombard it with cannons from the river plus with cannons they have on the land. But Proctor, after having a long siege at Fort Meigs that failed horribly, he doesn't want to spend days and days bombarding the fort. So what he does is he orders the soldiers to charge the walls. Now, the Native Americans here, they did not go with the British because they apparently knew it was better than to charge a wall. So the British went ahead without the Native Americans. They get to the wall. They have to go down a very deep ditch. Some say up to 6 feet deep. When they get into this ditch, the Americans, on order of Major Croghan, fire a cannon down the length of the ditch, inflicting heavy casualties to the British. Then, of course, the British fail their assault. They take heavy casualties and are forced to retreat back to Canada. You then have the Battle of Lake Erie occurring with Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, and then following the battle, the capture of Detroit and the Battle of the Thames in Canada. And that ends the fighting out here in the Northwest. So you can look at this area, Northwest Ohio and Fort Stephenson, as a major turning point in the War of 1812. Now I'm going to turn this back over. Do any of you have any questions? All right.
Thank you very much, Major, who ended up being Colonel George Croghan from Fort Stephenson. We're really happy to have you with us today. And actually, you are a perfect lead-in to telling the Clyde settlement story. We had a guy, maybe looked not quite as good as you, who wandered through on the way to Fort Stephenson, and it is in the beginning of our story of Clyde today, too.
Well,
so thank you again very much.
You're welcome.
I am going to need a little help today. It's hot, and I'm really pleased everybody was able to come on a hot and humid afternoon. It's so much fun preparing programs on behalf of the Clyde Heritage League, but it's much more fun when we see people here who can enjoy it. It's also going to be a lot more fun if we don't have to sit still the whole time and listen, right? Right. Okay. I do need to give a few introductions. First, I would like to introduce Sharon Kinnear. If you want to wave, Sharon. Sharon is the president of the Clyde Heritage League. We do have trustees here with us today. Linda Wilbert is inside the museum, and when we're finished with the program, we hope you'll take advantage of looking at a few of the new exhibits inside, and of course the air conditioning. Sandy would be very pleased to sign you up to be a Clyde Heritage League member. She has sign-up forms at the front entrance, and she'd also be glad to sell you a souvenir of your time with us this afternoon. One of the most exciting souvenirs there today that would fit our theme of the program might be the Hamer's Corner Cookbook. We're going to talk about Hamer's Corners today as the beginning of our story of Clyde. Before I continue, I do want to recognize another trustee here, Mrs. Pat Gill. She's very pink today. Wave, Pat. And Ernie Gill, who is an assistant curator in the yellow shirt here, who was instrumental in getting all this set up today. And Norm Rogers, who is going to be behind a camera somewhere. I'm not sure what happened to him. Maybe he went, there he is. He's behind a hat, okay. He is also an assistant curator here and really helps make things happen. So, how many Clyde Heritage League members do we have with us today? If you want to raise your hand, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's good. Well, like I said, we'd be glad to sign you all up if you like what we're doing. I said there were some new exhibits inside the museum. We do want you to explore those today. We would ask that during the program we try to keep these double doors closed. There is water in the green cooler. Please feel free to get up at any time and get yourself a bottle of water. The large bottles are meant for the grown-ups, and the little ones are meant for the children. I'd like to thank Ruth Brown in advance. Thanks, Ruth. Or Mike. I didn't want to get ours out today, but Ruth is instrumental in forming the Tiffin Washboard Band, who will, some of their members will be here to entertain us in just a little while. Now, children, you can build some things if you like. There's logs over there Mr. Gill brought in. You can color. You can do some word searches for the streets in Clyde. Perhaps you might even find your street on there. That would be a good thing to do. Find where home is. I do need some children to help me, though, with the beginning of the program, so I'm going to be pointing at people. And I'm hoping that when I point at you, you will be a good volunteer, and you will come forward right away. I promise I won't be very hard on you. I want to remind everybody, first let's close our eyes. Let's imagine that we are in a very dense woods. There's kind of some swampy ground under our feet. There's some wild animals that we hear. We are in the wilderness. And that is how Clyde started. The only inhabitants that were here was, let's see, how about you? Will you come and help me? Would you like to come with him? Okay. Our first inhabitants were the Indians, or the Native Americans, and they actually became very friendly with the few white men that were beginning to settle here. They taught the white men how to plant their crops, the food that they needed to grow. They taught them how to hunt in amongst, all this wilderness of trees. They formed some really good friendships. They were not all hostile. And when America declared war on Britain, as Mr. Krogan just talked to us about, the Indians actually sided with the British. They thought that the white men were coming in to take over their land. The Indians believed that the land belonged to the Great Spirit, and that wasn't anybody in particular. And they were afraid the white men would take over the land and ruin it. And in some people's minds, that's a little bit about what happened. Of course, they did have to take down a lot of the trees in order to be able to plant food and survive. So that was when the woods and trees all started to be cleared. Thank you, little Indian. I'm afraid the wind's going to blow my papers away. Let me see. I need another volunteer. I think I'm going to choose you. This young man volunteered to set up this morning. He's from Clyde High School. It might not fit. I'm not sure. And that's from a lady's boa, not a proper plume. Well, can you hold it up there? Or do you want to pick someone else? Okay. Okay. Local history lore tells of a Samuel Pogue who came through this area on his way to serve in the war. On his way to Fort Stevenson, he placed a stake near a spring and he hoped to return after the war. A copy of Sam Pogue's military record is on display in one of our exhibits in the museum. About 1820, in February of that year, Sandusky County was officially created. The first list of registered voters from this area is also on display inside the museum in one of the exhibits. There were several other settlers who started to migrate in. One was a Jonathan Rathbun, and then of course there was a Samuel McMillan who settled on a hill just a few blocks down where today we know as the Methodist Church. When Sam Pogue returned after the war with his stepson, Lyman Miller, Giles Thompson, Amos Fenn, and Silas Dewey, he found, I need another volunteer. He found a Jesse Benton had squatted on his land and built a cabin. Jesse Benton had found this wilderness quite lonely, and it didn't take him very long when Sam Pogue traded Jesse Benton a barrel of whiskey. I think she's going to go home happy with a barrel of monkeys today. Sam did receive the land deed for that plot. It was presented to him by President Monroe, who was the one that was signing the land deeds in that time. There's a copy of that land deed in the museum in one of our new exhibits. See, Amos Fenn and William McPherson, who was General McPherson's father, happened to be the executors of Sam's estate. And the cabin was divided between a daughter she's gonna have to change her hat, between a daughter, Jane Pogue, and how about you? Do you want to be Lyman Miller? Do you want to be Lyman Miller, please? We have to say yes when people ask us to volunteer. It's the way communities are developed. All right. We're going to pick this guy right here, a washboard player. Okay, this is George Brown. Hey, George Brown, did you know you married Jane? Would you like to get down on your knee and propose? There's Mr. Miller proposing to Jane Pogue. Now, I need a Sam Baker. Who wants to be Sam Baker? No? Please, I've got hats. We won't make you come all the way up, but pass him a hat, would you please? Thank you. On March 9th, 1822, the county commissioners, Sandusky County Commissioners, met to establish and organize Green Creek Township. They happened to meet at Sam Baker's house to elect the officers. The first township trustees were Sam Baker, Joseph Rumry, and Sam Pogue. In 1827, the Maumee and Western Reserve Turnpike reached this area. It was not a turnpike like we know today. It was just a mud road that the government was trying to drain to make a good east-west throughway to encourage settlement, and it was called the Pike. Actually, after they laid logs across that pike, they called it the Corduroy Road. Bump, bump, bump. I need another volunteer. This is William Hamer. He was one of our early entrepreneurs. He built a double-roomed house along the pike, and he opened a tavern. And when it was a great stagecoach stop. But because of that mud road and then, the logs I talked about, wagons would continuously get stuck. Well, some people decided that getting stuck wasn't so bad for the development of a new settlement. because the people had to go to Hamer's Tavern and have a few tips. They also had to go to William McPherson's blacksmith shop and get a wheel fixed, or maybe a new shoe on their horse. So they would actually make mud holes, hoping that travelers would get stuck. A few other buildings began to arise. Would you like to sit down, honey? A few other buildings began to be constructed. In fact, there was a brick building built. The first brick building was built by Reuben Bowles. He made his own bricks out of local clay. There was another brick building at the corners made out of clay bricks, of course, and it ended up being a tailor and a shoe shop. Mr. Harkness built a brick building, so you can see that we're going from log cabins now. A sawmill was developed, and they started to be able to hew those logs to make wood frame buildings, and the settlement grew. But when news of the railroad came, it excited everyone, and it became clear that there would need to be a new village developed south of Hamer's Corners. So, by the end of 1851, and some lots had been laid out a little further south, William Hamer closed his business. It is now 1852, and our new emerging town near the railroad south of Hamer's Corners has no real name. Oh, can I hear it? A group of men met at Witcher's Hotel to discuss this awful problem. And names were suggested. And O.P. Woodard from Clyde, New York, suggested the name Clyde. Another book I've read said it was a Dr. Treadway. Clyde was suggested, so Clyde it is. And Clyde it stays today. So I think we need a toast to a 160-year-old town, Clyde, Ohio. I want to go just one step further. This was 1852 when Clyde was named Clyde. It was a village. It grew, and it grew fast. Lots of properties were built around the railroads, and the downtown, the main street, continued to develop. And it grew so fast and so big that by 1866, it became a city and was incorporated. And that's kind of where we're going to leave our story today. But I want to invite you all back on the third Thursday of July when we will continue the story with a program called We Get Around. And I'd like to talk about how transportation really helped the community develop. So we do have another program here in July, and you're welcome to attend that. I need to look at my notes and see what I've forgotten. Okay, I didn't do too bad this time. I do have one hat left though, so I must have left somebody out. Or two hats. So if we have somebody here that's really disappointed they didn't get a hat today, see me and we'll figure out a way of how we might be able to have a raffle on those last two hats. I was going to read a story, but the time is getting away from us, and we were so, fortunate to have Major Krogan with us today. But I want to draw your attention to a new book that has just been released again. It is a very old book. It was copyrighted in 1942, and it's about a little house by Virginia Burton. It is a wonderful story for children, but the message is for everyone. And it's about a little house that was built strong and sturdy in the middle of a daisy field beside an orchard. Kind of sounds like Clyde. And the city grew up around the little house. The little house could not be sold for silver or gold, So as the city grew up, the little house just stayed there. It became abandoned and old and ugly, and nobody loved the little house. But it was still a strong and sturdy little house. Well, eventually the great-great-granddaughter came to the city and saw the little house. And she said, well, that's a nice, strong little house. It just needs a little bit of loving care. So they decided to move the little house out of the city, back out into a daisy field beside an orchard, and the little house was happy. And why is that important? Because sometimes houses are moved. They're not destroyed. They're actually moved elsewhere where they look just fine. And that actually happened in Clyde. And thanks to Dorothy Cox, who did quite a bit of research, we found a few houses that were moved right here in Clyde, and there's pictures of them on one of our exhibit boards in the garage annex. One in particular has a story about the Underground Railroad and slaves. Another one is there was a little house on the corner of Main and, well, where the John Dewey House is, if you're a Clyde resident. There was a little house there before that big John Dewey House was built. They moved the little house next door to make room to build that beautiful big house. So that happens all the time too. So things change, towns change, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, and sometimes we can keep our memories of it, but sometimes we can keep the real thing. And that's why it's so exciting working at this museum. This is an 1886 building that the Clyde Heritage League has taken good care of. We're just in the process now of a paint job. They also own the 1882 Town Hall, which in August they'll be embarking on a brick restoration project. It's just so, it's so much fun to be part of a group of people who believe in their past. And everything you see in the museum today as you tour has been donated. It is from people who want Clyde history to survive and be shared, and I think that's just wonderful. So thank you. What we're going to do now is introduce our washboard band members and Ruth Brown, and have a little entertainment. And lastly, we will get some crackers, cookies, pretzels, peanut butter, all that good stuff out for our mortar to build some buildings on this long table. We are going to create architectural delights, a brand new Main Street in Clyde, Ohio.